Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma Gillespie.
I'm Lucy Tassell.
The evidence tampering trial of an Aussie reality TV star is currently underway in Darwin's Supreme Court. Matt Wright has been accused of attempting to pervert the course of justice following a 2022 helicopter crash that left his co-star dead. The hearings have so far uncovered serious allegations of cover-ups and falsified records. Today, we'll break down everything you need to know about Matt Wright and this case.
Emma, before we get into the details of this trial, can you tell the listeners a bit about Matt Wright? I think I recognise his name probably just from the headlines.
Yeah.
But who is at the centre of this and what do we need to know about him?
So Matt Wright is a 45-year-old crocodile wrangler. He rose to prominence through a couple of reality TV series.
Okay.
And he's described as having this larger-than-life personality, as you can kind of expect from anyone who works with crocs on TV. And he became known for his work relocating crocodiles across Australia's outback. And that was basically what was portrayed on this National Geographic TV show called Outback Wrangler. So that ran from 2011 to 2020, pretty long-running series.
Yeah.
And more recently, he's also starred in a show called Wild Croc Territory. That's been picked up by Netflix. But it should be noted that this Netflix series premiered after the current legal proceedings against him were launched.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So then how did those proceedings begin? Because you mentioned a fatal helicopter crash in your intro.
Yep. So as well as being this croc wrangling TV star, Matt Wright is also a tourism operator. He'd been operating multiple ventures in the Northern Territory, including a helicopter company called Helibrook.
Okay.
Now, on February 28, 2022, Wright's friend and co-star, his name was Chris Wilson, or Willow was his nickname. He was killed during a crocodile egg collecting mission in West Arnhem Land on board a Helibrook helicopter.
Okay.
So Wilson was suspended 30 metres beneath the chopper.
Whoa.
And the craft crashed with him on it. Wilson was discovered fatally wounded about 40 metres from the wreckage of the helicopter crash, and the pilot, a man called Sebastian Robinson, was critically injured. He's actually now paraplegic from that accident. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau found that the helicopter likely crashed due to fuel exhaustion, so essentially that it did not have enough petrol.
Okay. Was Wright on board this helicopter?
No, so he actually wasn't on the chopper at the time of the crash. He isn't accused of any matters relating to the crash itself.
Okay.
But it was his company's helicopter, and it's really what Matt Wright did after this incident that's in question in court now.
So he hasn't been accused of causing the crash or anything to do with it, really. What are these legal proceedings then?
Yeah, so the charges against Wright, as we've mentioned, don't relate to the cause of the accident. And the prosecution isn't alleging that he's responsible for either the crash or Wilson's death or even Robinson's injuries. Instead, though, prosecutors allege that Wright was worried that crash investigators would discover his company was cutting corners, basically, that the crash would lead to a bigger investigation that would uncover safety breaches. And the prosecution's case is that Wright tried to cover up these alleged shortcuts and failures of the business, Helibrook, after the crash.
So what has he specifically been charged with?
So he's facing a few offences, all relating to evidence tampering and trying to persuade witnesses. These alleged offences occurred in March and September 2022, so in the weeks immediately after the crash and a couple of months later. Investigators claim that Wright didn't properly record helicopter flying hours across the business and was concerned that crash investigators were going to find that out and that would potentially lead to charges against him and his company. So specifically, prosecutors alleged that Wright basically asked his team to torch maintenance records.
Right.
So he basically has been accused of lying about the amount of fuel in the machine's tank, that he tried to get the injured pilot to manipulate flight records. The prosecution really painting this picture of covering tracks of a business that was not operating within the regulatory expectations.
Okay. So now it's at a trial. What have we heard from the trial so far?
So there's been this really prominent witness testimony from Sebastian Robinson himself. So this is the pilot who survived the crash but was left paraplegic. And he's been giving evidence throughout the trial via video link from his wheelchair. Robinson basically says he idolized Matt Wright. He had this high-profile boss and he really respected him. And Robinson has kind of admitted to breaking aviation rules in order to please him. So he admired his boss, he was intimidated by him, and he wanted to please him pretty much. Robinson told the court that if Wright said jump, I'd say how high when it came to following his instructions.
Yeah.
Robinson agreed that disconnecting flight hour recording meters and falsifying paperwork to match that was a, quote, very common practice at Helibrook, and that practice was at the direction of Wright, that Wright told the pilots to do stuff like that.
Yeah, wow. So that's pretty damning testimony. What else has he said about the actions after the crash, given that that's kind of like the center of this case?
Yeah. So Robinson, again, the pilot, he testified that Wright visited him in hospital about 10 days after the crash. While he was heavily sedated, he was seriously injured. And Wright allegedly asked him to manipulate flying hour records and to go through his phone and, quote, delete a few things.
Wow.
Robinson told the court he was, quote, scared and panicked at the time, and he told Wright, quote, I didn't feel comfortable doing it. But Wright allegedly visited him in hospital multiple times with these kinds of requests.
That's a pretty powerful allegation. Obviously, there's always two sides to a court case. What's the defense said about Wright's actions during that time?
Hello, my name's Sam. I'm the co-founder of TDA. I'm just popping in to interrupt this video to ask if you could do one thing for me, and that is press subscribe on this YouTube channel. It's the best way to show us that you love what we do and that you're here for our future. And now, back to the deep dive.
Yes, so the defense team has painted a very different picture of Robinson, the pilot. The lawyers of Matt Wright claim that this pilot was a cocaine-using party animal, to use their words. They suggest that he was the kind of pilot that was constantly breaking aviation rules of his own accord, including disconnecting meters, falsifying records. There were some text messages from Robinson's phone that were read out in court showing that, the defense argue, he regularly used cocaine, but Robinson denies ever flying any helicopter under the influence of an illicit substance. So the defense is essentially arguing that Robinson and his family have fabricated all these allegations against Wright to protect Robinson for being blamed for the crash instead. The defense have also put forward a witness, one of Wright's friends this week. His name is Jai Tomlinson. He's been quizzed about the crash and Wright's actions in the aftermath of it. And Tomlinson has either denied any suggestion that Wright interfered with any documents or tried to cover up evidence, or for questions he's been unable to answer or provide detail on, he has claimed memory issues have led him to forget what happened. So he's kind of saying, not sure about this or that because I have memory issues, but the things I do remember show that Matt Wright didn't do anything wrong.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah. Obviously, there's one person we can't hear from in this trial, and that is the person who was killed. That's Chris Wilson. What can you tell me about him?
So Chris Wilson was a 34-year-old father of two, known as Willow to his friends. He was a born and bred Territorian, a really experienced local. He had worked in construction, he'd obviously worked with crocs, and he was also the managing director of the Northern Australia Civil Company. So he worked in aviation and construction himself, as well as being this kind of wild croc man that we see on TV. His wife, Danielle, has been present in court throughout the trial. So she's been sitting on one side of the courtroom while Wright's supporters and his family have been watching from another.
Wow.
And separately, this is another interesting layer to this complicated case.
Yeah.
Danielle Wilson, the widow of the man who died in the crash, is also suing Matt Wright and his company Helibrook, as well as the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, in the federal court over her husband's death. So there is separate action going on about the actual crash itself.
Yeah. What other witnesses have we heard from?
So a man called Mick Burns, who's been in the crocodile egg collecting industry since the early 2000s, he broke down on the stand talking about the fatal crash. He was one of the first responders. He recalled rushing to the scene, discovering Wilson was dead. He actually escorted Wilson's body back to Darwin and was one of the people that broke the news to his family. The court has heard from a former police officer, Neil Mellon, who flew to the crash site with Matt Wright. All of these witnesses are kind of there to help the jury and the court piece together those hours and weeks after the crash. So much of this trial really depends on this small window of time after the crash and, what went down, who was there, what was said. And those really seem to be the puzzle pieces that the prosecution is trying to put together through all these witness testimonies.
Speaking of the prosecution, I don't know if you can answer this, but this would be like the Crown is what they would be representing?
Yes, yeah.
So effectively representing the people of Australia or kind of like the government in a sense?
Yeah, the Northern Territory Crown.
Yeah. So then what do we know about the defence? Because they obviously are representing Matt Wright.
So Wright is represented by some pretty heavy hitters in the legal world, it has to be said, and that includes South Australian King's Counsel David Edwardson. He is the lawyer who successfully defended former NT police officer Zachary Rolfe. He was charged with murder over the death of Kumanjai Walker, a First Nations man who died in police custody.
Yeah.
And those charges against Rolfe were dropped.
Yeah.
So that was with the counsel or the legal representation of David Edwardson.
Okay.
Edwardson told the jury in the case of Matt Wright, his client, that Wright emphatically denies all allegations, and Edwardson warned about the extraordinary amount of public interest in this case and what that might mean for Wright's right to a fair trial. Edwardson said that there have been, quote, many ill-informed, if not scandalous opinions expressed in many different forums, from social media to commercial television. So the defence strategy really appears to be about attacking the credibility of key witnesses, particularly the pilot and his family, as well as questioning whether or not this is even a fair process.
Yeah, interesting. If he's found guilty, what is going to happen to him?
So the maximum sentence that Wright is facing is 15 years behind bars. That's the maximum penalty for obstructing or perverting the course of justice in the NT. So we're talking about potentially very serious jail time, very hefty, significant fines, financial penalties if he is indeed found guilty.
How much longer is the trial expected to run?
So it's been going for a few weeks now, 2 weeks actually. It could run for another few weeks in terms of the schedule that we know about. We're still waiting to hear from some members of the pilot's family who were present during these alleged hospital visits where Wright came and allegedly tried to persuade him to delete files or to cover up flight information. So they are expected to give evidence in the next week. If the trial runs for the full 5 weeks that it was scheduled to run, the jury would be expected to deliver a verdict in either late August or early September. So a few weeks to go. But as far as I can tell for now, this case looks like it will really ultimately come down to a question of credibility. Who the jury believes when they hear these conflicting accounts of what happened in those really crucial days after the accident.
Yeah, wow. Thanks so much for explaining that, Emma, and we will continue to follow this case closely as it unfolds. That's all for today's deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back again this afternoon with the headlines. Until then, have a great day.